Hey, it's Jen, and it's time for the Power Chord Devlog. This week, we had a chance to speak with Jamie, Big Blue Bubble art director, and Mikko, lead designer on Power Chord. Let's see what they had to say. Thank you both so much for setting aside your very valuable time to be able to talk to us about Power Chord today. So, where did the idea for Power Chord come from?
So I guess I'll field this one because there's quite a bit to it. Originally, it was we were tasked to work with some existing assets. That didn't really work out. As we discovered, we had significantly less assets than we thought we did. But the theme was kind of set that we needed to do something with a band and musical instruments. And I was thinking, okay, so what exactly can we do with a band? How can we make a game out of this without it being some sort of rhythm game? So I started thinking about maybe a band management game. And that still needs to have a component that has you actually playing the actual songs or having concerts. And that's kind of where it jumped into having these RPG gameplay elements of having abilities for the characters that they could play during concerts, and you'd rank them up and improve your characters, as you tend to do in a management game. But it kind of grew from there into something that was more akin to fighting raid bosses, and that was a metaphor for the actual concerts. And then it just moved directly from that into a kind of battle of the bands format. It was going to be a lot more traditional, where you're competing with opposing bands to be the greatest band in the world. And it started taking inspiration from other games in the genre once we started looking at the actual abilities and how to manage them. This included games like Darkest Dungeon, especially. Eventually, we got to the point where we realized that it felt very limited to have a small number of abilities per character, and we started looking into the card metaphor really heavily, and it kind of just expanded from there into what it is right now.
I love how much iteration went into that. That's really cool.
There was a lot.
Okay, so then what were some of the inspirations behind like the punk grunge metal aesthetic that the game has?
So where that kind of came from was a couple places. It's got a very heavy sort of comic book influence with artists like Matteo Scalera, Wes Craig, Sean Murphy. So it's a lot of sort of a very dirty, actually that's not probably a complimentary word, but it embraces sort of more imperfection and the actual results you see from tools, as opposed to trying to overly polish things. And that is because it came from the other big influence behind a lot of the visuals of the game was old photocopied gig posters. So I could remember walking down the street, and most of the time, to actually find out that there was a band in town, it wasn't through any sort of website. You found out because there was a photocopied flyer stapled to a telephone pole or to the side of an abandoned building or something that had been boarded over. And I used to collect these posters. So you'd be walking down the street, find one, rip it down, it's yours now. And I had a wall that was covered in all of these old posters. And they were ripped, they were stained from rain, they'd been folded up, there was ink running through them. They were already photocopied, so there was kind of another sort of imperfect feel to them, where they'd been sort of bashed together to make something. And so that was a big influence on the actual art of the game, was to try and make it, or give it some of that same sort of feel, where it's not about trying to make things perfect, it's about trying to see what you can make out of what you've got. And that's sort of the same idea that starts to flow into the card game as well, where it's not about having a perfect plan when you walk into it. It's about having the idea that I'm just going to start, I'll find things along the way, and it'll turn into something by the end. So that was a big part of the visual representation there. And then on the music side, a lot of people, they want to immediately jump to there's demons in there, so obviously this must be metal, which is I'm fine if people want to think of it that way. I know from my point of view, it has much more of a like late '90s sort of punk theme that runs through it, but then that led into more of a I don't know the exact term I want to use here. I've just been referring to it as bar rock, where it's not quite something that gets into heavy radio play or overly takes over like that. But it's something where it has a lot of attitude to it, and um, it's bands like Red Fang or Orange Goblin. These are sort of the influences that started on the music side. And I always find that when I start working on a game, the first thing I like to do is build a playlist for it. Something where the music can help inform the art and back and forth. I just find that that always helps making some of those decisions and coming up with a theme and sort of making sure that everything is tied together there. So it started with that playlist and those influences of the posters and just some of the comic book artists that I really like right now.
What do you think sets Power Chord apart from other deck building, card battle, and roguelike games?
So as I mentioned before, we took a lot of inspiration from games like Darkest Dungeon, as well as Slay the Spire and Monster Train. These are the big names kind of in the roguelike and deck builder genre. Now, Darkest Dungeon and Slay the Spire are definitely very different games, one being a deck builder and the other very much not being one. But you can probably see very quickly what influence those games have had. The idea of the party of characters, as well as the deck management. And what we feel sets our game apart is the design philosophy of how the spells and cards in the game are actually set up. And a big part of the roguelike deck builder and roguelikes in general is constructing synergies, interesting combinations of abilities and equipment to try and break the game. So the design goal of this game has been to basically create as many opportunities for synergies as possible between as many different things as possible in the game. Every character can do something with every other character. Every piece of equipment has some sort of relevance to different abilities. So waiting for a key turn to happen so that you can finally lay out that one combination you were hoping to accomplish with your deck is something that happens much more regularly in our game. And it's intentionally designed to do that.
Perfect. And I'd like to ask both of you, what part of the game are you most proud of?
I think the part that I'm most proud of right now is that I'm really enjoying the visual side of it and the theme that we're able to get into the game. For years, it's been very much like games go through a sort of fantasy phase or a sci-fi phase, and usually there's a lot more rules that you have to kind of follow when it comes to that sort of stuff. And so early on in this game, when we were able to get our sort of demons versus rock, punk comic book aesthetic to things and the theme, I kept expecting people to say no and stop me at some point. And they didn't. So I just kept going further and further with it, assuming that, again, somebody would probably try to stop me. And now we've gotten all this way in, and we're committed to it, and it's been a lot of fun to be able to do this, because it is a pretty big departure from what we get to do sometimes, where often it can feel like you need to play a little more safe. But on this game, we really are able to start narrowing in on a very tight theme for it, and a smaller sort of target audience, knowing that we'll probably reach beyond that. But we're able to do something on this one that we haven't really gotten a chance to do before. And so that's been a lot of fun, and that is probably the part that I'm most proud of right now.
Awesome. What about you, Mikko?
Of course, what I'm most proud of in terms of this game is, of course, on the design side, and that has to do with the synergy systems that have been created. It's really exciting to see what kind of crazy stuff QA comes with, or the elaborate ways they've figured out to break the game. And having a deck builder that really pushes that feeling and makes it satisfying is something I haven't experienced in the genre before, and I'm really happy to have kind of accomplished something like that.
Perfect. So, what do you think has been the most challenging part of the production process so far?
Once again, goes back to that idea of synergies and combinations. There are a lot of cards in this game, and equipment and characters, and each of the characters is designed in a way that they play differently from each other, even though they fall into an archetype. So because of the variety of characters and the variety of archetypes, they need to be able to work together with each other, which means that they also need to not only support the team, but also function in and of themselves while doing that. And given the hundreds of cards and equipment in the game, it's been really challenging to balance, rebalance, and design with that kind of concept in mind.
Absolutely.
And I'd say that when it comes to the hardest part of this game, really, any game is hard to make. There's no easy steps to it. But one of the interesting challenges on this one has been that it's been very iterative as we go. So it hasn't been as easy to simply say, here's the direction we're going to start going, here's what we're going to start working on, and then step by step we get there. It's been a lot of, we need to put this in, try it out, see how it goes, and then adjust after that. So you've got design is kind of driving art, but then art is also driving design as we start making some of these changes and finding ways to put them together, or finding ways where it feels like they should be put together, and so we'll make those changes. So a lot of it really has been that there's a lot of back and forth on this one, which is probably its greatest strength, but also it's one of the more challenging things, is trying to fit that stuff together in the end.
So, switching gears to maybe a little less serious question, have you encountered any funny bugs during development?
I think my favorite one up to this point has been it was an animation bug, where when a character was first put in, the very first time you play the game, it would default back to some of the placeholder animations from another character, which meant that you would put in, say, a new demon drummer, it'd stand there, it would roar at you, and then it would shrink down and hide inside its pants. The entire head, the torso, the arms, everything just sort of collapsed in to the pants, and it would wait there for its turn. And then the torso would pop back out, it would smash you, and then it would shrink back into the pants. And it's a really fun thing to have happen, except that nobody knew why it was doing that, so everybody kept wondering why this animation was broken, and it happened on every single character. But if you were never the same person to find it, it just kept coming up over and over again, and it turned into a fun surprise for people more than anything. But yeah, that was probably my favorite one, was enemies hiding inside their pants.
That would have been so funny to see. What about for you, Mikko?
I think for me it was testing out Roxy Cleaver for the first time after having the initial implementation for her, and finding just how broken her kit was. It was pretty easy to actually reach the second boss in the game, who up until that point had been just this complete and utter wall that was unkillable because of how powerful they were. And then in 4 turns do 1,300 damage to them, wiping them completely. So that was fun. I don't know if it really qualifies as a bug. I have since revised it. Still a very powerful character, but not doing that kind of damage anymore.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, what can you tell us about the new demo?
I think the big thing in the updated demo right now really is that introduction of a new character to try out, Roxy Cleaver. So we wanted to not just add in some new battle mechanics and some balance changes and updates to the existing characters, but we wanted to give you something new to play with to be able to see how much of a difference it actually makes to change out those characters. Because that's a really big thing for us, is getting you in there to try out something more. And the new characters, they, for example, in this case, because you're testing out a drummer, you go from Boar, who has his barrier shields that will really come in handy for you, being able to block any amount of damage on a single hit, and it turns into a drummer that is more flexible, and maybe you can do a lot more damage on a turn where you don't need that armor as much. So just seeing how those combinations change for people is going to be probably the biggest thing you get out of this demo.
Awesome. Anything you'd like to add, Mikko?
Yeah, we're also going to be introducing some new battle mechanics, most important of which is the armor break system. This will allow players to interrupt attacks from enemies. While the game is not as difficult as we intend it right now, it's going to be moving a lot more in that direction. So it's going to become a lot more valuable to actually disrupt what the enemies are doing, especially when it comes to bosses. There's also been a lot of changes in terms of how armor is handled overall in the game.
Awesome. I can't wait to check out the new demo. I know the community is very excited about the new demo. Thank you so much, Mikko and Jamie, for chatting with us today, and awesome work on the game. I'm so excited to see what you come out with next.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Next time on the Power Chord Devlog, we're going to be doing a showcase on one of your favorite characters. We'll also be doing a deep dive into the brand new demo set to drop in just a couple of weeks. Want to get in on the action? Make sure you wishlist Power Chord on Steam right now. You're also going to want to join our exclusive Power Chord Discord, where you're going to get behind-the-scene looks at the game, official announcements from us, and information on the upcoming closed beta sessions. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll catch you bandmates later.